Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking into some really big structural shifts that happened with the DSM-5 back in 2013,
Right.
specifically for autism spectrum disorder.
Yeah, it was a fundamental change, really, a major consolidation.
Right. So before DSM-5, you had this umbrella term, pervasive developmental disorders, PDDs.
Exactly. And under that, there were, four distinct diagnoses, things people might remember, like Asperger's disorder, PDNOS.
Okay.
And the DSM-5 basically swept those away and created one single diagnosis, Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD. It's dimensional now.
A unified spectrum. And that meant changing the actual rules for diagnosis, right? Fewer main categories.
Precisely. They went from 3 symptom domains down to just 2 core criteria that you have to meet.
Which are?
Criterion A, which covers persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction, and Criterion B, that's restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities, RRBs for short.
Got it. A and B, both required.
Both required, no question.
Okay, let's dig into Criterion A first. The social communication part. I heard this was pretty strict.
It is. That's where a lot of the debate came in. To meet Criterion A, you need to show persistent problems, and critically, you have to meet all 3 specific types of deficits listed.
All 3. What are they?
Deficits in social-emotional reciprocity, sort of the back and forth of interaction. Then deficits in nonverbal communication, like eye contact or understanding gestures. And third, deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationship.
Wow, okay, so 3 out of 3. No wiggle room there.
None. And that 3 of 3 rule is really why it kicked up so much dust immediately.
How so? What did the research show?
Well, when they tested the new criteria against the old DSM-IV ones, they found the DSM-5 criteria were very specific. If you got the diagnosis, you likely fit the new profile well. Specificity was high, like 1.0.
Okay, that sounds good. Specificity is important.
It is, but the sensitivity, that was another story. It came in quite low, around 0.57 in some key studies.
Hold on. 0.57 sensitivity. So for you listening, that basically means the new criteria might have missed almost half the people who actually should have qualified under the previous system.
That's the implication, yes. It suggested the diagnostic door got a lot narrower.
So who is potentially getting excluded?
Primarily individuals who might have previously been diagnosed with Asperger's or PDD-NS. Maybe they had developed really good coping strategies for one of those 3 social areas.
Ah, so they could compensate for one deficit, but because it wasn't all 3.
Exactly. They'd fall short of this strict Criterion A threshold, even with significant challenges remaining.
Okay, so Criterion A is the tough gatekeeper. What about Criterion B? The restricted and repetitive behaviors, the RRBs. Was that as strict?
Criterion B is actually a bit more flexible. It's a 2 out of 4 requirement. You only need to show at least 2 types of these behaviors.
2 out of 4, okay. What are the 4 types?
Well, there's stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, use of objects or speech. Then insistence on sameness, inflexible routines, or ritualized patterns. Highly restricted, fixated interests. And the 4th one, B4, this was actually a significant addition in DSM-5.
B4. That's the sensory stuff, isn't it?
That's right. The formal inclusion of hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment.
So things like being overwhelmed by loud noises or maybe having an unusual tolerance for pain or issues with textures.
Exactly. Things that were often observed clinically but weren't a core diagnostic criterion before. Now they officially count towards Criterion B. It was a huge validation for many.
That makes sense. Recognizing sensory differences as integral. Now, thinking clinically, DSM-5 also introduced a related diagnosis, right? For people with social issues but without the RRBs.
Yes, social pragmatic communication disorder, or SCD. This was important. It captures individuals with significant, persistent difficulties in the social use of communication.
But the P is you can't have the restricted, repetitive behaviors.
Correct. Criterion B essentially acts as the deciding factor. If you meet Criterion A for social deficits, and you meet Criterion B with at least 2 RRBs, you're looking at ASD. If you meet Criterion A, but don't meet Criterion B, then SCD might be considered.
So Criterion B is the fork in the road, diagnostically speaking.
You could put it that way, yes.
Another practical change was about severity, right? They moved away from just one overall severity level.
Yes, that was a very useful change. DSM-5 requires clinicians to specify severity separately for Criterion A and Criterion B. There are 3 levels for each.
Level 1, 2, and 3.
Correct. And importantly, these levels are defined purely by the amount of support the person requires.
Based on need. So level 1 needs some support, level 2, substantial support.
And level 3 means requiring very substantial support. Think significant, possibly round-the-clock assistance for daily functioning related to that specific criterion. It ties the diagnosis much more closely to functional needs and planning support.
That seems much more practical for treatment planning. One last point at the timing. Symptoms have to start early.
Yes, criterion C states symptoms must be present in the early developmental period. But, and this is crucial, the DSM-5 explicitly notes that symptoms may not become fully manifest until social demands exceed limited capacities or may be masked by learned strategies in later life.
Masked by learned strategies.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds complicated for diagnosis, especially in adults.
It is. It puts a real emphasis on the clinician needing to gather a thorough developmental history. You might be assessing an adult who seems quite functional now because they've learned to compensate incredibly well.
So you need evidence from childhood school reports, family accounts?
Absolutely. You need to confirm those deficits really were present early on, even if they look different now. It acknowledges the impact of cognitive compensation.
So summing up, the DSM-5 aimed to unify the spectrum, make it dimensional, and link diagnosis more directly to support needs via those severity levels for A and B.
I think that's a fair summary. It's streamlined things conceptually, even if the stricter criterion A caused debate. The inclusion of sensory issues and the clarification on masking were also really significant steps.
Right, but that point about masking, it leaves us with a bit of a puzzle, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, if an adult has developed such effective coping strategies that their early life deficits aren't immediately obvious, how much should the diagnosis rely on digging up that history versus assessing their current level of functioning and adaptation? Sort of a philosophical question about diagnosis itself.
That's a great point. How much weight do you give to the historical struggle versus the present-day compensation? The DSM-5 definitely leans on proving that early onset, making that historical detective work absolutely critical, something for us all to think about.